Welcome back, APUSH students. Today is How to LEQ Unit 2. This is a series where I walk you through complete essays for every single unit of APUSH. These examples use real prompts with real raw essays, so don't mind the spelling or grammar mistakes. So here are the prompts. The first thing you want to look at is what type of prompt format this is. These are the compare and contrast format. So the first one is compare British and French colonization goals and patterns in North America between 1608 and 1763. The second one is compare the manner in which the British enforced mercantilism on the American colonies in the period 1713 to 1754 with the period 1763 and 1776. And the last one is compare loyalist and patriot perspectives on the movement towards independence and the subsequent American Revolution. Confine your answer to the period 1763 to 1783. Now, I strongly encourage you to practice on or at least think about all three of these prompts, but for the purposes of this video, we're going to be doing the first prompt. So here's the thesis. Again, we're doing compare British and French colonization goals and patterns in North America between 1608 and 1763. So the first thing that I'm thinking about is the certain unique behaviors that the British and French kind of exhibited when they colonized the Americas. And I'm also looking for the crossovers between the two. And then since I'm analyzing goals and patterns, I want to bring in how it eventually ended up. And we know that the British obviously more dominated the Americas after the colonization efforts than the French, so we want to use that for our essay as well. So here's a thesis. Both England and France had similar goals and patterns underscoring their colonization efforts in terms of land expansion that sparked conflict, but the differences in how they conducted relationships with the American Indians is more important because it becomes an essential cause for how the distribution of land after the colonization efforts heavily favored the British over the French. So this thesis sets us up for the first paragraph to talk about how both the British and French expansion efforts started conflict with the people in the region and between the British and the French, because we know that the French and Indian War was because of British and French colonization expansion. But then for the second paragraph, I'm going to talk about the different ways they interacted with the American Indians and the native tribes in the area, and how that led to the French ultimately failing to colonize the Americas as effectively as the British did. And that's going to be the bigger picture and the main point of the essays, that these differences became partly the basis of why the British dominated the Americas so well. So here's the context. In the early 17th century, major European powers, including England and France, pushed to colonize the New World. England came first, as religious battles in France involving the Huguenots prevented expansion. When the French moved in, they were more focused on the West Indies, but also pushed to colonize Canada, while England controlled the east coast of the modern United States. Both England and France had similar goals and patterns underscoring their colonization efforts in terms of land expansion that sparked conflict, but the differences in how they conducted relationships with the American Indians is more important because it becomes an essential cause for how the distribution of land after the colonization efforts heavily favored the British over the French. So now the first body paragraph. Both France and England had similar views in terms of land expansion, and they had similar outcomes derived from those visions. France had their eyes set on expanding westward to grow the fur trade, specifically beavers, which Coeur des Bois, I think that's how you pronounce it, helped to scavenge. In similar fashion, English colonists desired to expand westward for economic opportunity, as British mercantilist demands burdened the colonists. Eventually, both of the nations' similar views on expansion came to a head at the Ohio River Valley, where both the French and the British desired to control. This similarity in visions created conflict not only between the colonists but also the native tribes. This land-based conflict evolved into the French and Indian War, where both France and England fought. It was in this war where the differences between British and French colonization goals and patterns became evidently more important, despite their similarities in land expansion goals. So that last part is a transition to the next paragraph. I think you guys should always have a transition in your essays. And now here's the second paragraph. Before the outbreak of the French and Indian War, France and the English colonists clearly aligned in different relationships with the Native Americans. For Britain, their colonists felt that the native tribes were a danger to their colonization efforts, and expansion was justified for the colonists. This is evidenced by the frontier population's insistence on going to war with American Indians, represented by Bacon's Rebellion, as well as their resistance to the Proclamation Line of 1763, where Britain tried to limit colonial expansion by drawing an artificial border and stationing troops along the frontier. In contrast, the French colonists sought to create alliances with the American Indians, where they intermarried, traded fur and beaver skins, and led other shared behaviors. The French colonists also allied with the Huron Indians, therefore dipping their feet into the intertribal conflicts burdening the native culture. This alliance pinned the ever-powerful Iroquois Confederacy against France because the Iroquois were against the Hurons, which gave trouble to French expansion. In these relationships is where the differences in the outcome of land acquisition partly stems from. While the colonists were generally against allying with the American Indians, the French set themselves back in expansion efforts down the Ohio River Valley. In combination of France's lack of military support in North America and resistance from neighboring tribes caused by their desired alliances, Britain secured an advantage over France. The differences in France and England's military desires and their views on allying with the American Indians are essential ideas in understanding how the post-1763 map of North America came about, which is why such differences are so important. So at the end of this paragraph, we did a pretty good job of hammering home why France and Britain's differences in their colonization efforts and their treatment of the American Indians was so important. And here's the conclusion. France and Britain both led colonization efforts in North America in the 17th and 18th century. They had similar goals and patterns because of their shared desire for expansion and how that created conflict, but they differed in how France had less of a desire to devote military forces, and more importantly how France sought to ally with the natives and Britain did not. French and Indian alliances set back France's expansion efforts because they faced opposition from the powerful Iroquois, which became one of the reasons Britain triumphed in the French and Indian War. The effect of this victory was that Britain gained a bunch of land westward, in which the colonists desired to expand on. This land, combined with the money spent by Britain to win the war, encouraged Britain to tax and restrict the colonists. The colonists felt these efforts were unjust, thus leading to the eventual revolution after such time. Therefore, there are reasonable connections to be made in regards to how the differences in French and British colonization patterns influenced further developments in North America well into the future, like the American Revolution. So here we did a pretty good job of furthering that point of why the differences are so important, and we also are able to tie it to a point in the future, which is a great way to wrap up in your conclusion. And that's a wrap. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next video, and goodbye. Yo, if you're super cool and awesome, you should follow my Twitter or X if you're that kind of person. It's @Clark4724. I post a lot of random stuff on there, but I also post channel updates, and when my next videos are coming out, so if you're gonna keep watching my channel, then I recommend you follow, and thanks.